We are going to talk about a specific aspect from my childhood and how it has affected me over the course of my life. My mother was probably the queen of hypercritical parents. I thought all mothers were like she was. She wanted to live her life over through me. She was so critical of everything I ever did, literally ever. At some point, you no longer want to hear somebody else's opinion about how you live your life. I was sick and tired of her having these issues with everything I'd done. Most people would be damn grateful to have me as a daughter. When you die, when you have gone on to glory, I will not cry and weep because I didn't live up to your expectations. I will feel no guilt and no shame for living my life the way I wanted to. I was a good daughter. You really do have to get to an age and a stage in your life where you're ready to own who you are. I will not tolerate this behavior anymore. As a reformed, hyper-criticized child, I say, do what's best for you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Brick City Brown Chick Show. I am your host, the aforementioned Chick, and today we are going to do something a little different. We are going to talk about a specific aspect from my childhood and how it has affected me over the course of my life. So the title of this episode is The Hyper-Criticized Child. Now, right about now, some of you are going, hyper-criticized? Is that one of those new psychiatric buzzwords? It is not. It is a very old term. Now, what does it mean? Hyper, which means on top of, plus, more than. For example, if the doctor tells you your child is hyperactive, it means they're constantly moving, they can't sit still, all that kind of thing. So that's what hyper is. And criticized means to be critical, to scrutinize, to never be happy with what happens or what someone does. And by that definition, my mother was probably the queen of hypercritical parents. Now, I say this not to bash my mother, or this is not going to be one of those, oh, my parents treated me so terribly and this is what happened. This is just the truth of the matter from my perspective as a child and from my perspective as an adult. Now, of course, as a child, I had no idea that my mother was hypercritical. I thought all mothers were like she was. Now, what are some examples of her being hypercritical? I remember very clearly my first day of school, like when I was 6 or 7, she wanted to take pictures of me in my school uniform. I went to Catholic school. This is the first time I was wearing this particular outfit. So she wanted to see me in my school uniform. And I don't know, I was being bratty or a pain in the neck or whatever. And I would only take the pictures if I could be holding my doll. At 6, my mother thought, you're too old. Not that I was too old to have dolls, but that I was too old to be standing in a picture with a doll. So she was arguing with me about it. My father was like, just let her hold the doll so we can take this picture and get on with it, because that was always his role. He was the buffer between the two of us. So she finally let me hold the doll and took the pictures. But then she was upset that I wasn't smiling in the pictures. And my smiling, or not smiling more accurately, in photos became a long-standing issue between my mother and I, because she always wanted me to have this big smile plastered on my face. It looks terrible, right? It looks fake, because it's not who I am, and that's just not how I show up in the world. So this was always a huge issue with her. So I remember that very clearly. When I was 10 years old, I was all excited. I was having this birthday party, my first birthday party as a kid in double digits. The first year I got to have a party that wasn't at McDonald's or Burger King. Yes, parents used to do that back in the day. It was a big to do, because then you didn't have to have all these kids in their house, which was a big thing for my mother. She didn't want a whole lot of people in her house. And it just made the parents' life easier. So this was going to be at the house. It's my first, sort of mature party. And my mother insisted on inviting this girl who lived in our neighborhood, who I could not stand. And it wasn't just me. A lot of other people didn't like her. She was just not a pleasant person. And my mother insisted on inviting her. And I had a meltdown and said, she ruined my party and all this other stuff. And she got so mad, she slapped me in the face. That was the one and only time my mother slapped me ever. But she was super irritated because she thought I was behaving like a brat. So that's the second incident. The third incident I remember is sort of a more long-term issue between her and I. When I was about 12, 13, I decided that I wanted to learn a musical instrument. Now, up until that point, I played in my school's fife and drum corps. And if you're thinking, fife, do you mean like from the Revolutionary War? Yeah, I grew up playing the fife. I was a nerdy kid. I was one of those kids. So I wanted to learn to play something else. And she said, great, perfect, wonderful. You're going to learn to play the piano. And I said, I don't want to play the piano. I want to play the guitar. And at first I wanted to play an electric guitar, but when I was about that age, that was about the time Tracy Chapman came out. And I thought Tracy Chapman was absolutely fabulous. So I wanted to learn to play an acoustic guitar. And you have to understand that my mother is an old Southern Baptist, and certain things that became popular in the 80s are things she just couldn't mentally deal with. So I think my mother made the connection that Tracy Chapman was gay, was lesbian, long before I did. It didn't matter to me. I just liked her music. So my mother's equated me playing an acoustic guitar somehow with becoming a lesbian. So that was just something she could not stomach. To the point where she went out and bought a used piano, thinking, I guess, that she would guilt me into learning to play the piano. That is not what happened. That piano sat in our house for years. I never learned to play the piano, but she also refused to buy me a guitar and let me take guitar lessons. So, short version of a long story is, I never learned how to play either, but that was just one of those long-term issues with her. And those are just three. There are numerous other experiences. She wanted me to be a cheerleader. She wanted me to go to charm school. She wanted me to come out in a debutante ball, which was just insanity. When I was in grade school and high school, I was on what used to be called the forensics team. I think they stopped calling it that because now forensics is associated with crimes. So I think now it's just called the debate team. But I was on that too, and she wasn't crazy about that. She wanted me to be an engineer. I am not an engineer. I've never had any sort of engineering aptitude, but that didn't change her mind about it. She wanted my husband and I, after we got married, to move to the Atlanta area in Georgia. And my first question was, where exactly are my white husband and I supposed to live around Atlanta, Georgia? So there have been many long-standing issues between my mother and I. Now, as I said at the beginning, as a child, I did not understand what that was about. I just felt like she just wanted to argue with me about stuff because she just did. And my father, bless his heart, he had a sit-down conversation with me and an equal sit-down conversation with my mother and basically said, listen, you can't fight about everything. The two of you have to have a come to Jesus about certain things, because otherwise this is going to be a very long life for the three of us. And I was stubborn, I freely admit. My mother is equally stubborn, if not more so. So there was just no way the two of us were not going to get into stuff. What I came to realize as an adult, and by an adult, I mean I was probably well into my 30s, that I began to understand was what my life was growing up compared to what my mother's life was. And what I figured out one day is that my mother wanted me to have the life she didn't have. And lots of parents want that, right? They want their kids to have a better life than they did. But with my mother, that manifested itself as she wanted to live her life over through me. And she wanted me to do all the things she didn't get to do because she was the oldest of 10 kids. My grandparents were sharecroppers and they were poor. And I don't mean kind of poor, I mean poor. So she wanted me to be a cheerleader because she had wanted to be a cheerleader. She wanted me to learn to play the piano because she had wanted to learn to play the piano. And once I put that into place, it gave me a much better understanding of why she pushed the things she did and why she was so critical of everything I ever did, literally ever. It didn't matter what it was, if it was school, if it was sports, if it was extracurricular activities. She just had an opinion about the way I chose to do things. So as a woman who moved into her 30s and then into her 40s, I really did get to a point with my mother where I talked to her as little as possible. Because at some point, you no longer want to hear somebody else's opinion about how you live your life. You just don't want to hear it. And I had dealt with it all through my childhood and through most of my 20s. But I just hit a wall where I was like, okay, you know what? We're going to have surface level conversations, and I'm not talking to her about what I do with my life because she's not going to agree with it and she's going to be critical of it. So I just got to that point. In my mid 40s, or maybe late 40s, it's starting to run together now, my Aunt Rosa died. My aunt and my mother were like this. They talked to each other every day. My aunt still lived in New Jersey after my mother moved back to North Carolina. They would talk to each other early in the morning, and they would call each other and say, you up, you moving, you doing stuff. They would talk to each other in the middle of the day about whatever they were doing. And then they'd talk to each other at night before they went to bed. So my mother was well into her 80s when my aunt died. She was not physically able to go to New Jersey and go to the funeral. So she had asked my husband and I, who were going to the funeral anyway, to go to the funeral and represent her. Okay, fine, no problem. Did that. Didn't hear anything else about it. Well, I guess a couple of weeks after my aunt's funeral, my mother sent me this long handwritten letter. Now you gotta understand, my mother was an English major in college, and she was a teacher for 40 years. So handwriting is one of those things that's super important to her. So she sent me this long letter in which she basically chewed me out for a whole host of things, including going to my aunt's funeral and not, I guess, specifically talking to certain family members about whatever. I can't even really tell you what the beginning of it was because it got me so heated. And I mean heated. And one thing about me is what I've always chalked it up to be is I'm a Cancer. I am a true crab. If you push me, if you get in my face and I'm just kind of trying to shut down, I will do what a crab does. I will retreat into my shell. But once you press the wrong button, I'm coming out with the pinchers. I'm coming out swinging. And she hit the wrong button with me at that stage of my life. So I sent her a return letter in which I blasted every single thing she took issue with and told her I was sick and tired of her having these issues with everything I'd done. And I said, in so many words, you know, I am a good kid. I went to college. I got my master's degree. I've worked for 30 years and never asked you for money, never been to jail, never been in trouble. Like most people would be damn grateful to have me as a daughter. And the fact that you're not, I am relinquishing that and it is no longer my problem. If you want to be mad at me for the next 20, 30, or however many years you live, so be it. And everybody that I told this story to, including my husband, was like, oh boy. Because he knew my mother was not going to take that well. That A, I had talked back to her because I didn't. B, that I stood up for myself. And that C, I threw her nonsense back in her face. So, of course, she came back with another letter. And this went on for probably about, 3 months or so. We were just sending letters back and forth, not calling each other, not emailing each other, not talking to each other at all. To the point where some of her siblings would call me and say, okay, this is ridiculous. You know what your mother's like. And I was like, yes, I do know what she's like. And she's your sister, but she's my mother. I have dealt with this my entire life. And I'm sorry you don't get it, but I'm done. That started in, I guess June, July. Roll forward to, it's the beginning of November. My husband and I always go to North Carolina for Thanksgiving ever since my mother moved back there. We go there, we have the big family Thanksgiving, and that's what we do. Well, that year I was like, okay, I guess we're going to Thanksgiving, but we're going to stay with one of my cousins because I'm not staying in her house. We're not speaking. This is ridiculous. I'm not doing it. So about a week before Thanksgiving, I guess, my mother called me and said, are you all coming to Thanksgiving? I said, yeah. And she said, well, your room will be ready, meaning the bedroom in her house that we stayed in. So I was like, okay, guess we're staying at her house. So what I told her was that she and I needed to have a conversation and that I was tired of these letters back and forth and we were grown women and it was ridiculous. We just needed to have a conversation. And we had about a 2-hour conversation a couple of days after we got there. And we got out a lot of stuff that clearly both of us had been holding on to for years that needed to come out. But the most consequential thing for me that I said to her was, listen, I don't know what the game plan is for you being mad at me about everything I've ever done, but here's what I'm going to tell you. When you die, when you have gone on to glory, I will not cry and weep because I didn't live up to your expectations. I will be sad that you are gone because you are my mother, but understand I will feel no guilt and no shame for living my life the way I wanted to, because I did not disrespect you and I did not do anything to you. So if you want to be mad at me from now until infinity, that's on you, but I guarantee you I will not feel guilty or bad for the way I treated you after you're gone. And again, the people who heard this story were like, you said that to your mother. And I said it had to be said. I had to be very clear about the fact that I was no longer a child. I was no longer a teenager. I was no longer even a young adult. I was a woman in my 40s who had been married like 15 years and taken care of myself and always stepped up to the plate, including going to take care of her after she had breast cancer and had to have a lumpectomy and all that kind of stuff. And so I maintained then what I maintain now. I was a good daughter. I have no control over whether she'll ever feel like that or not, and that's her problem, not mine. So what I want to say to grown people who realize that they were also the children of hypercritical parents is you really do have to get to an age and a stage in your life where you're ready to own who you are and make that clear to your hypercritical parent. Do my mother and I get along better since we had that discussion? Yes, we do. And I think that's because she's clear now that I have no guilt and that I don't feel bad and that I didn't do anything to feel bad about. It's kind of like if you're up against a bully and the bully pushes you and you push back and the bully goes away. It's because they now know that you'll stand up to them and you won't take the nonsense. And once I made it clear that I was done carrying away from her and not wanting to have this discussion with her because some part of me felt like that was disrespectful, and you don't do that with your parents. You do what you have to do as an adult. And if that means the way you take back your power and your ownership is to say, I will not tolerate this behavior anymore. And if this is what you choose to do, understand that that's your choice. That doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm not telling you it's easy. It's not. Do I wish that I had been strong enough or in a different place to have that conversation with my mother when I was in my 20s? Sure. 30s? Absolutely. But I was in my 40s. That's when I was ready to do it, and that's when I did it. So just understand that when you take on that task, it's not easy. But it's the best thing you can do for you. And at the end of the day, you are the only person you have any control of. So as a reformed, hyper-criticized child, I say, do what's best for you. I want to thank everybody for joining me for this episode. If you are not subscribed to this podcast, please subscribe. There's a button under my head. Click on the notification button so you know when I upload these episodes. And I will see you again next time. Take care.